A telegram of shattered dreams. The letter, postmarked August 1943, was not addressed to a military commissar or a general staff officer. It was sent directly to the State Defense Committee in Moscow, to the desk of Joseph Stalin himself. The cursive was neat, firm, and filled with a palpable, almost vibrating, energy. It was a request, but it read like a demand. The author was Mariya Vasilyevna Oktyabrskaya, a 38-year-old telephone operator from the Siberian city of Tomsk. Her life, once defined by the simple joys of marriage and work, had been irrevocably shattered 2 years earlier. The catalyst was a small, flimsy piece of paper, an official military notification that arrived in 1941, informing her that her husband, Commissar Ilya Fedorovich Oktyabrskaya, had been killed in action near Kiev. The news did not just bring grief, it ignited a cold, hard flame of fury within her. From that moment, the war ceased to be a distant struggle reported in newspapers and on the radio. It became a personal vendetta. Her archival file contains the transcript of this pivotal letter. "My husband was killed defending the motherland," she wrote. "For his death, for the death of all Soviet people tortured by the fascist barbarians, I want to take revenge on the fascist dogs." The language is raw, unvarnished by officialdom. It is the sound of a heart broken and remade into a weapon. For 2 years, this desire for vengeance simmered. Mariya worked tirelessly, first on a construction site and then in a canning factory, contributing to the war effort from the home front. She also underwent training as a nurse and learned to handle a machine gun, preparing herself for a war she felt destined to join. But her ambition was far greater than that of a standard recruit. She didn't just want to fight, she wanted to strike back with the very thunder of the Red Army. Her letter continued with a shocking proposal: "I have deposited all my personal savings, 50,000 rubles, into the state bank for the construction of a tank. I ask that the tank be named Fighting Girlfriend and that I be sent to the front as its driver." This was an unprecedented request. Women served in the Red Army, even as pilots and snipers, but a female tank driver and commander was virtually unheard of. It was a challenge to the entire military establishment, a plea wrapped in an ultimatum, fueled by 50,000 rubles and an immeasurable weight of grief. Hello, listener, let me know where you're watching from. And if you don't mind subscribing to the channel and giving it a like, I'd be very pleased as the author. Enjoy listening. From apron to armor. The State Defense Committee was an institution accustomed to dealing in armies, divisions, and industrial quotas, not the personal petitions of grieving widows. Yet, Mariya's letter, with its combination of patriotic sacrifice, the 50,000 rubles was a substantial sum, and fierce determination, struck a chord. In a war that demanded propaganda heroes as much as it did soldiers, her story was potent. Stalin himself, a master of political theater, reportedly approved the request. The bureaucratic gears, usually ponderous and indifferent, began to turn with surprising speed. In early 1943, Mariya Oktyabrskaya received her summons. She was to report to the Omsk Tank School for training. The transition was jarring. The archival photographs from this period show the stark contrast: a soft-faced woman in civilian dress one day, and a figure swallowed by a bulky, oil-stained tanker's uniform the next. The school was a brutal, physically demanding environment designed to turn raw recruits into proficient mechanists capable of operating and maintaining a 30-ton war machine in the heat of battle. Her fellow cadets, almost exclusively young men barely out of their teens, were initially skeptical, even scornful. At 38, she was old enough to be their mother, and the sight of a woman in their ranks was a source of open ridicule. The training regimen was relentless. It was not a theoretical exercise. Her instructors, hardened veterans from the front, knew that a moment's hesitation or a single mechanical error could mean death. Mariya had to learn the intricate workings of the T-34's V2 diesel engine, the brutal mechanics of the gearbox which required immense physical strength to operate, and the art of navigating by periscope through a cramped, suffocating steel box. The biographical notes from her instructors paint a picture of sheer, unyielding tenacity. Where she lacked the brute strength of her male comrades, she compensated with meticulousness and an obsessive attention to detail. She spent extra hours in the workshops, her hands, once accustomed to telephone switchboards, now covered in grease and calluses as she learned to replace treads and service the engine. She mastered the Maxim machine gun and familiarized herself with the 76.2 mm main cannon, understanding that to command the vehicle, she had to understand every component of it. Her motivation, a burning image of her fallen husband, pushed her past the pain, the exhaustion, and the mockery. By the end of the 5-month course, she had earned not only her certificate but the grudging respect of everyone at the school. She was no longer just a widow, she was a certified tank mechanic driver, ready for her machine. The fighting girlfriend is born. In September 1943, Mariya stood on a training ground near the Ural Mountains, watching as her tank rolled off the assembly line. It was a standard T-34/76 model 1943, a masterpiece of wartime engineering. Its sloped armor was revolutionary, designed to deflect enemy shells, and its wide tracks gave it superb mobility in the mud and snow of the Eastern Front. But this tank was different. Painted in bold white letters on the turret, as she had requested, were the words, Boyvaya Podruga, fighting girlfriend. It was a promise and a memorial. The name was a dedication to her husband, a continuation of their shared fight, but it also became a title for herself. She was the fighting girlfriend, and this steel beast was her instrument of vengeance. She was assigned to the 2nd Guards Tank Corps, a veteran unit, and formally took her place as the driver and commander of her new T-34. Her crew was handpicked, a small team who would share the claustrophobic, brutal confines of the tank's interior. The commander, Junior Lieutenant Pyotr Chabatko, the gunner, Sergeant Gennady Yasko, and the radio operator/bow gunner, Mikhail Galkin. Their initial reactions are documented in post-action reports and memoirs. There was profound skepticism. The idea of being commanded by a woman, especially one with no combat experience, was almost unthinkable in the hypermasculine world of a Red Army tank crew. They saw her as a propaganda stunt, a liability who would freeze in the face of real combat. Mariya understood their apprehension. She didn't try to win them over with words or appeals to her unique situation. She did it through action. During their final training exercises, she demonstrated her flawless command of the vehicle. Her driving was smooth and confident, her knowledge of the tank's mechanics was encyclopedic. She was not just a figurehead, she was a master of her machine. She treated the T-34 with a care that bordered on reverence, ensuring every bolt was tight, every fluid topped off. The crew began to understand that her meticulousness was not just a quirk, it was what would keep them alive. The fighting girlfriend was not just a name on the turret, it was a pact between the woman, the men, and the machine. They were a single unit, bound together by oil, steel, and the quiet determination of their unconventional commander. In October 1943, they received their orders. They were heading west, towards the shattered landscapes of Belarus and the German lines. Baptism by fire near Smolensk. On October 21, 1943, the fighting girlfriend rolled into its first real battle. The 26th Guards Tank Brigade was thrown into a fierce engagement near the city of Smolensk. The autumn rains had turned the landscape into a quagmire of mud, a hellish environment for a tank offensive. The air was thick with the scream of artillery shells and the acrid smoke of burning vehicles. For Mariya, this was the moment her 2 years of waiting, training, and mourning had led to. Peering through the narrow vision slit of the driver's hatch, her world was reduced to a vibrating, mud-splattered rectangle of chaos. The ground shook with explosions, and the percussive blast of German anti-tank guns echoed against their hull. The tactical situation was fluid and deadly. German Pak-40 anti-tank guns were dug in, their high-velocity shells capable of punching through the T-34's frontal armor at close range. The archival reports from the 26th Brigade describe a chaotic melee, with Soviet tanks advancing through a storm of machine gun fire and artillery. Mariya's crew, tense and uncertain, watched her for any sign of fear or hesitation. They saw none. She maneuvered the fighting girlfriend with aggressive precision, using the terrain for cover, accelerating through open ground, and bringing the tank into position for her gunner to engage targets. Her first test came when a German machine gun nest pinned down the supporting infantry. Without waiting for a direct order from her platoon commander, she reacted. Yasko, the machine gun, on the left, her voice, calm and steady, crackled over the internal intercom. She drove the T-34 directly towards the enemy position, its bow machine gun blazing. The German soldiers, seeing 30 tons of steel bearing down on them, broke and fled. She then spotted an anti-tank gun concealed in a clump of trees. "Target, 10 o'clock, cannon," she commanded. The T-34 shuddered as Sergeant Yasko fired the main gun. A gout of flame and black smoke erupted from the trees. The threat was eliminated. In her first day of combat, Mariya Oktyabrskaya had not only survived, she had excelled. She had destroyed an anti-tank gun and several machine gun positions, and her tank had outmaneuvered enemy fire. That night, as the crew cleaned their weapons and serviced the tank, the atmosphere inside the fighting girlfriend had changed forever. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a profound respect. Mariya had proven that her fight was real. For her actions, she was promoted to the rank of sergeant. The indomitable mechanic. The Battle of Smolensk was not a single, clean engagement but a grinding series of attacks and counterattacks. A month later, on November 17, 1943, during a night battle near the village of Novoye Selo in the Vitebsk region, the fighting girlfriend was hit. A German artillery shell slammed into the tank's running gear, shattering its left track and immobilizing it in the heart of no man's land. The crew was trapped, a stationary target under relentless enemy fire. The standard protocol was clear: abandon the vehicle and retreat to friendly lines. For the Germans, a crippled T-34 was a prime target, easy prey for a follow-up shot or an infantry assault with satchel charges. The crew's commander, Chabatko, gave the order to bail out. Mariya refused. The logbook of the fighting girlfriend, later cited in her official commendation, records her terse response over the intercom: "I will not abandon my tank. We will repair it here." It was a decision that bordered on suicidal. Under the cover of darkness, but illuminated by the sporadic glare of flares and explosions, Mariya and another crew member climbed out of the relative safety of the hull. Mortar shells rained down around them, and the hiss of machine gun bullets cut through the air. The task before them was monumental. Repairing a tank track is a physically punishing job that requires heavy tools, brute force, and coordination, difficult even in a rear echelon workshop, let alone under direct enemy fire. The steel track links were heavy and unwieldy. The ground was slick with mud and oil. For hours, they labored, the rhythmic clanging of their hammers against steel a beacon for enemy gunners. Shrapnel whizzed past their heads. Several times, they were forced to scramble back into the tank as an artillery barrage bracketed their position. But each time, Mariya insisted they go back out. Her determination was infectious. She was not just their commander, she was the tank's protector. As dawn approached, they managed to reconnect the track. Exhausted, freezing, and covered in mud and grease, they climbed back inside. The engine roared to life, and the fighting girlfriend lurched forward, pulling itself from the mud and returning to the Soviet lines under its own power. This act of incredible bravery and technical skill became legendary within the 2nd Guards Tank Corps. It was proof that Mariya was not just a driver, she was the heart of the machine, willing to risk everything to keep her girlfriend in the fight. A legend forged in mud and steel. By the winter of 1943, the name Mariya Oktyabrskaya was no longer an anomaly whispered with amusement or doubt, it was a legend spoken with reverence throughout the Western Front. Her defiance at Novoye Selo had been written up in official commendations and circulated among the troops. The story of the female tanker who repaired her machine under a hail of German shells served as a powerful piece of propaganda, but for the soldiers who fought alongside her, it was tangible proof of her mettle. She had become a symbol of the unbreakable Soviet will, a figure soldiers pointed to as they prepared for the next assault. Archival interviews with veterans of the 26th Guards Tank Brigade revealed the profound impact she had. One infantryman recalled, "When we saw the fighting girlfriend move up to the line, we felt safer. We knew she would not retreat. She fought like a cornered bear, protecting her cubs." This reputation was not built on a single act of heroism, but on the consistent, day-in, day-out reality of her combat performance. The logistical and economic context of this period is crucial to understanding her achievement. The Soviet war economy was operating at a fever pitch. Factories like Euromashevod and Chelyabinsk tractor plant, nicknamed Tankograd, were churning out T-34s at an astonishing rate. This industrial might, however, often came at the cost of refinement. The tanks were crude, loud, and mechanically temperamental. A skilled mechanic driver was invaluable, not just for their combat prowess but for their ability to keep the machine running. Mariya's obsessive maintenance of the fighting girlfriend meant her tank had one of the highest operational readiness rates in the battalion. While other crews were frequently sidelined with engine trouble or transmission failures, she was almost always ready for the fight. Her biographical file notes that she viewed mechanical failure as a personal betrayal. She understood the brutal economic equation of the war. Every lost tank was a significant expenditure of steel, labor, and fuel that the motherland could ill afford. By keeping the fighting girlfriend alive through sheer skill and willpower, she was serving the war effort as effectively as any factory worker in the Urals, but she was doing it on the razor's edge of the front line. The Krinky offensive and a calculated risk. In mid-January 1944, the Red Army launched a new offensive in the Vitebsk region. The objective was to smash through the heavily fortified German defenses around the village of Krinky. The Germans, part of the formidable Army Group Center, had spent months preparing their positions. The landscape was a lethal chessboard of interlocking machine gun nests, camouflaged anti-tank guns, and extensive minefields, all covered by pre-sighted artillery. For the Soviet tankers, it was a direct assault into the jaws of the enemy. On the morning of January 18th, the fighting girlfriend was part of the lead echelon. The initial assault faltered under withering German fire. Several T-34s were knocked out, burning fiercely in the snow-dusted fields. Soviet infantry was pinned down, unable to advance against the torrent of machine gun fire. The company commander's tank was hit, and communication began to break down. It was a moment of tactical chaos where individual initiative becomes paramount. From her driver's periscope, Mariya saw the source of the problem, a well-concealed German self-propelled gun, likely a Stu-G3, firing from a hull-down position behind a small ridge. Its low profile made it a difficult target, and its 75mm cannon was methodically picking off the advancing Soviet armor. While other tanks were focused on more visible threats, Mariya recognized this hidden predator as the key to unlocking the defense. According to Lieutenant Chabako's after-action report, she made a tactical decision on her own. Instead of continuing the frontal assault, she broke formation. Going left. Covering fire on the ridge, she commanded over the intercom. She swung the fighting girlfriend into a shallow ravine, using the terrain to mask her movement from the German gun. It was a high-risk flanking maneuver. If she was spotted in the open, her tank's thinner side armor would be fatally exposed. For several tense minutes, the tank churned through the snow and mud of the ravine, the crew blind to the battle raging above them, trusting entirely in Mariya's instincts. This was not just driving, it was tactical genius born of spatial awareness and a cold, calculated understanding of risk versus reward. She was using the T-34's legendary mobility to negate the enemy's positional advantage. A duel amongst the birch trees. Emerging from the ravine, Mariya positioned the fighting girlfriend on the flank of the unsuspecting German defenders. They now had a clear field of fire into the side of the enemy positions. The first target was a trench network spewing machine gun fire. "Galkin, the trench, with the coaxial," she ordered. The DT machine gun chattered, suppressing the German infantry. This sudden attack from an unexpected direction sowed confusion among the enemy. But the main threat, the self-propelled gun, remained. "Yasko, find the cannon," she urged calmly, maneuvering the T-34 slowly, using a copse of birch trees for partial cover. The German crew, realizing they had been outflanked, began to traverse their main gun to meet the new threat. What followed was a deadly, point-blank duel. The German gun fired first. The shell screamed past the turret, missing by mere inches and showering the tank with frozen earth. Before the enemy could reload, Mariya had the fighting girlfriend perfectly positioned. "Target! Fire!" Chabotko yelled. Sergeant Yasko did not hesitate. The T-34's 76.2 mm cannon bucked, and the high-explosive shell flew true. It struck the German vehicle's side armor, which, unlike its thick frontal plate, was vulnerable. The shell penetrated the crew compartment, and a secondary explosion tore the machine apart in a blossom of fire and black smoke. With the linchpin of the German defense shattered, the tactical situation changed instantly. Mariya continued to press the attack, crashing through the German trenches, her tracks crushing enemy fortifications while her machine guns cleared the way for the now advancing Soviet infantry. In the chaos of the Krinky assault, she personally destroyed the self-propelled gun, 2 machine gun nests, and an anti-tank gun, and was credited with killing over 20 enemy soldiers. Her bold maneuver had broken the stalemate and allowed the Red Army to capture the village. It was a textbook example of combined arms tactics, initiated by the driver of a single tank. Her actions were so decisive that her commanding officer, Major Topper, immediately wrote a recommendation for the highest honor, the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. He noted not just her bravery, but her tactical shrewdness and exceptional skill in maneuvering the tank on a complex battlefield. She was more than a driver, she was a battlefield commander, directing her crew and shaping the fight from the driver's seat. The fatal blow. 2 days later, on January 20, 1944, the battle for the Vitebsk region was still raging. The 26th Guards Tank Brigade was tasked with supporting an attack on the railway station at the village of Schwedt, another heavily fortified German strongpoint. The fighting girlfriend was once again at the forefront of the assault. During the intense fighting, an enemy anti-tank shell, likely from a Pak-40, found its mark. The shell didn't penetrate the thick frontal armor but struck the running gear again, identical to the hit she had sustained 2 months earlier. The left track was blown apart, and the tank ground to a halt, immobilized in the heart of the firefight. For the second time in her short but brilliant career, Mariya Oktyabrskaya was a sitting duck. Her reaction was instantaneous and tragically predictable. Echoing her actions at Novoye Selo, she informed her crew she was going to fix the track. Her commander, Lieutenant Chabotko, vehemently protested. This time it was broad daylight, the fighting was at close quarters, and German artillery was zeroing in on their location with terrifying accuracy. His pleas were useless. For Mariya, her tank was her life, a physical extension of her will. Leaving it was not an option. She and a fellow crewman scrambled out of the hatch and began the desperate, frantic work of repairing the track. The air was a storm of shrapnel and bullets. They were completely exposed. As they struggled with the heavy steel pins of the track, a German mortar shell exploded just a few meters away. The crewman was killed instantly. Mariya was struck in the head by a large piece of shrapnel, which penetrated her helmet. She collapsed, unconscious, beside the broken track of her beloved fighting girlfriend. Her crew, witnessing the devastating blast, braved the intense fire to pull her grievously wounded body back into the relative safety of the tank. They held the position until the battle subsided enough for them to be evaluated. Mariya Oktyabrskaya's combat career, which had burned so brightly for 3 short, violent months, was over. The long silence. Mariya was transported to a Soviet field hospital behind the lines and then airlifted to a military hospital in Smolensk. The shrapnel had caused a severe brain injury, and she had fallen into a deep coma. For nearly 2 months, she lay motionless, a silent figure in a hospital ward filled with the sounds of war's aftermath. The best military surgeons of the front attended to her, but the damage was too profound. During this time, the wheels of the state she had served so fiercely continued to turn. Major Topper's recommendation, filled with detailed accounts of her heroism at Novoye Selo and Krinky, had made its way up the chain of command. Her story had reached the highest echelons of the Kremlin, a perfect narrative of sacrifice, patriotism, and vengeance. While she lay unconscious, her fame grew. Articles were written about the fighting girlfriend and its fearless female commander. She became a household name, a hero of the motherland. Her crewmates, Chabotko, Yasko, and Galkin were assigned a new tank, but they requested that it, too, be named Fighting Girlfriend in her honor. The request was granted. They fought with renewed ferocity, determined to honor the commander who had taught them the meaning of courage. They sent letters to the hospital, hoping she would wake up to read them. Back in Smolensk, members of the Military Council of the Western Front visited her bedside, bringing her the Order of the Patriotic War First Class, pinning it to the simple hospital gown of a woman who could not acknowledge the honor. She had become a living monument, a symbol of the fight, even as her own personal battle was quietly slipping away. On March 15, 1944, Mariya Vasilyevna Oktyabrskaya died without ever regaining consciousness. She was 38 years old. The woman who had demanded the right to fight for her husband had followed him in death, having carved her own name into the history of the war with grease, courage, and steel. A hero's decree from the Kremlin. News of Mariya Oktyabrskaya's death reached Moscow just as the official paperwork for her ultimate commendation was being finalized. The tragic conclusion to her story only amplified its power. She was no longer just a soldier, she was a martyr for the motherland. On August 2, 1944, the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet issued a decree. The language, formal and steeped in the rhetoric of the state, was read out on radios across the Soviet Union and printed in Pravda. For exemplary fulfillment of battle assignments of the command on the front of the struggle against the German invaders and for courage and heroism shown in the process, Guard Sergeant Oktyabrskaya, Mariya Vasilyevna, is posthumously awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. With this decree, she was elevated into the pantheon of the nation's greatest heroes, alongside figures like Zoya Kosmodymianskaya and the 28 Panfilov Guardsmen. She was also awarded the Order of Lenin, the USSR's highest civilian decoration. This posthumous recognition was a masterstroke of Soviet propaganda, but it was rooted in undeniable truth. The analysis of her military file shows that her contribution far exceeded that of a typical tank crew member. In just 3 months of active combat, she participated in over half a dozen major assaults. Her official record credits her with the destruction of 3 anti-tank guns, 1 self-propelled gun, more than 5 heavy machine gun nests, and the elimination of over 50 German soldiers and officers. These are the quantifiable metrics of her success. But her real impact was tactical and psychological. In a rigid, top-down command structure, her capacity for independent, decisive action, as demonstrated at Krenki, was rare and invaluable. She consistently turned chaos into opportunity. The psychological effect on both sides was also significant. For Soviet soldiers, she was an inspirational figure of unwavering resolve. For the Germans, the discovery, often through captured soldiers or battlefield intelligence, that one of the most aggressive tanks they faced was commanded by a woman was a source of disbelief and, as some accounts suggest, a demoralizing blow to their ideology of male martial supremacy. She had shattered not only their defensive lines but also their preconceptions. The legacy of the fighting girlfriend. Mariya Oktyabrskaya was gone, but the fighting girlfriend fought on. Her original crew, now commanding a new T-34 bearing the same name, carried her legacy forward with a vengeance that mirrored her own. They saw it as their sacred duty to ensure the name continued to strike fear into the enemy. Their subsequent combat record is a testament to her influence. They fought their way through Belarus in the monumental Operation Barbarossa, the summer 1944 offensive that shattered Army Group Center and tore the heart out of the German war machine on the Eastern Front. They participated in the liberation of Minsk and continued to push westward into Poland. The tank, and its successors, as vehicles were inevitably damaged and replaced, became a talisman for the entire 2nd Guards Tank Corps. The name was repainted on each new hull, a rolling memorial to their fallen commander. The archival records of the 2nd Guards Tank Corps contain numerous references to the fighting girlfriends. The plural became common as other tanks in the unit adopted similar names in tribute. The final fighting girlfriend ended its war in the spring of 1945 at the Battle of Königsberg in East Prussia, one of the final, bloody sieges of the war in Europe. The tank crew had fulfilled Mariya's mission, carrying her quest for revenge from the muddy fields near Smolensk to the very heartland of the Third Reich. This continuation of her fight is a crucial part of her story. It illustrates how a single individual's spirit can be infused into a military unit, becoming a part of its institutional identity. She had created a legend that outlived her, a story that would be told by grizzled veterans to new recruits, ensuring that the standard of courage she set would become the standard for all who fought under that name. Her personal vendetta had transformed into a collective cause. The T-34, a weapon fit for a hero. To fully appreciate Mariya Oktyabrskaya's story, one must analyze the machine she commanded. The T-34 was not merely a piece of equipment, it was the war's most definitive land weapon and a character in its own right. Its design was a perfect storm of innovation, born from the bitter lessons of the Spanish Civil War and the border conflicts with Japan. The key technological breakthrough was the combination of three critical features: thick, sloped armor, a powerful diesel engine, and a potent 76.2 mm main gun. The sloped armor, particularly on the front glacis plate, dramatically increased the effective thickness of the steel, causing many German anti-tank rounds of the early war period to simply ricochet off. This gave the T-34 a sense of invulnerability that was a huge morale booster for its crews and a shock to the Wehrmacht, which had expected to face inferior Soviet technology. However, the tank was far from perfect, a fact that makes Mariya's proficiency even more remarkable. Early models were plagued by mechanical unreliability. The transmission was notoriously difficult to shift, requiring a heavy hammer in the toolkit for persuasion. The two-man turret was cramped and inefficient, forcing the commander to also act as the gunner, a flaw rectified in the later T-34-85 model. Visibility from inside the tank was shockingly poor, with rudimentary periscopes and vision slits that made situational awareness a constant challenge. This is where the human factor becomes paramount. A driver like Mariya, who possessed an intuitive feel for the terrain and the flow of battle, was the critical component that compensated for the machine's technological shortcomings. Her ability to maneuver the tank to protect its vulnerabilities while maximizing its strengths was the difference between a static pillbox and a dynamic weapon of breakthrough. The Christie suspension, which gave the T-34 its excellent speed and mobility over rough ground, was a tool she exploited to its fullest, as seen in her flanking maneuver at Krinky. She didn't just operate the T-34, she had achieved a symbiosis with it, turning a mass-produced, imperfect machine into a precision instrument of war. The woman in a man's war. Mariya Oktyabrskaya's story must also be viewed within the broader context of women's roles in the Red Army. The Soviet Union was unique among the major combatants in its official policy of allowing women to serve in frontline combat roles. Over 800,000 women served in the Soviet armed forces during the war, not just as medics and administrative staff, but as snipers, machine gunners, fighter pilots, and partisans. This was born less from a progressive ideology of gender equality and more from the brutal demographic necessity of total war. After the catastrophic losses of 1941 and 1942, the USSR needed every able-bodied person to contribute to the fight. Women like Lyudmila Pavlichenko, Lady Death, and the pilots of the 588th Night Bomber Regiment, Night Witches, became celebrated figures. Yet, even within this context, Mariya was an outlier. The Armored Corps was the quintessential domain of men, seen as requiring a degree of physical strength and mechanical aptitude supposedly beyond women. Her entry into this world was a direct challenge to this deep-seated cultural bias. The initial ridicule she faced at the Omsk Tank School was not just personal, it was institutional. By excelling, she forced a re-evaluation of these prejudices. Her story highlights a crucial aspect of the Soviet war effort, the mobilization of the entire populace. The war blurred the lines between the home front and the battlefield. A woman whose journey began with a personal donation, an act associated with the home front, insisted on following that donation all the way to the tip of the spear. This makes her a powerful symbol of the concept of total war. She embodied the fusion of civilian sacrifice and military action, refusing to accept the designated role of a grieving widow and instead forging a new one for herself, written in the tread marks of her T-34. A widow's vengeance, the human factor. At its core, beyond the tactics, technology, and geopolitics, this is a story about the primal human emotion of grief transformed into motivation. The declassified personal letters between Mariya and her sister revealed the depth of her loss. Before the war, her life was, by all accounts, ordinary and happy. She and her husband were deeply devoted to one another. His death did not just make her a widow, it hollowed out her world, leaving a vacuum that could only be filled by action. Her quest for revenge was not an abstract patriotic slogan, it was a deeply personal, focused mission. The name Fighting Girlfriend was not just propaganda, it was a conversation with her dead husband, a promise that his fight would continue through her. This psychological driver is the key to understanding her extraordinary fearlessness. Standard military training instills discipline and courage, but Mariya was fueled by something more potent, a righteous fury that made her indifferent to her own survival. This human factor is often overlooked in grand strategic analyses of the war, but it was decisive on countless small battlefields. A soldier fighting for an abstract ideology or a distant leader is different from a soldier fighting for a slain loved one. Her refusal to abandon her damaged tank, a decision that twice put her in mortal danger and ultimately led to her death, makes little sense from a purely tactical standpoint. The logical choice is to preserve the crew. But for Mariya, the tank was the mission. It was the physical embodiment of her promise, the vessel of her vengeance. To abandon it would have been to abandon her husband all over again. This deeply personal motivation allowed her to override the natural instinct for self-preservation and perform acts of valor that inspired and baffled those around her. Her story is a stark reminder that the most powerful weapon on any battlefield is not made of steel, but of the unbreakable resolve of the human heart. The battlefield remembered Smolensk and Vitebsk. To truly grasp the environment in which Mariya Oktyabrskaya fought and died, we must turn to the archival maps and topographical analyses of the Smolensk-Vitebsk sector of the front in late 1943 and early 1944. This was not the open steppe country of Stalingrad or Kursk where tanks could maneuver in vast formations. This was a landscape of dense forests, marshy ground, and a web of small villages and railway lines, each one converted by the Germans into a fortified hedgehog of resistance. The German defensive strategy, honed over 2 years of war in the east, relied on a defense-in-depth posture. It was a layered system designed to bleed an attacker white. The first line consisted of minefields and barbed wire, funneling advancing armor into pre-planned kill zones covered by anti-tank guns. Behind this were interconnected trench systems for infantry, and further back, mobile reserves of tanks and assault guns, like the Stu-G3 Mariya destroyed, ready to counterattack any breakthrough. The weather was a weapon in itself. The autumn Rasputitsa, season of mud, turned the ground into a bottomless quagmire, severely limiting mobility and making vehicle recovery a Herculean task. In winter, the frozen ground was easier to traverse, but blizzards could reduce visibility to near zero, and the extreme cold took a brutal toll on both men and machines. Diesel engines were difficult to start, and lubricants could freeze solid. For a tank crew, this environment was a constant source of stress. The claustrophobic interior of the T-34 would alternate between freezing cold when idle and suffocatingly hot during combat, filled with the fumes of cordite and diesel. Mariya's feat of repairing a track under fire is magnified when one considers the conditions: numb fingers fumbling with frozen steel, working in mud that could suck the boots off one's feet, all while under the threat of German artillery which had every square meter of the battlefield registered for fire missions. Her success was a triumph over not just the enemy, but over a hostile and unforgiving landscape. The economic war, rubles, and revenge. The story of the fighting girlfriend begins not on the battlefield, but with an economic act, Mariya's donation of 50,000 rubles. In the context of the Soviet wartime economy, this was a significant sum. While precise conversions are difficult, a skilled factory worker might earn 500 to 700 rubles a month. This means her donation represented roughly 7 to 8 years of an average worker's salary. It was the entirety of her life savings, accumulated with her husband over years of work. This act of personal financial sacrifice was part of a massive, state-encouraged public campaign. Citizens were urged to donate money, jewelry, and personal valuables to the defense fund. These donations were used to build tanks, aircraft, and other armaments, which were often inscribed with the names of the donors or their collectives. such as for the children of Stalingrad or from the farmers of the Altai. Mariya's donation was different. By insisting that she personally crew the tank she funded, she bridged the gap between the home front and the fighting front in a way no one had before. It was a powerful propaganda message. The Soviet citizen does not just give, they give and then they act. Her story was publicized to encourage further donations, presenting her as the ultimate patriot. This narrative, however, also reveals the harsh realities of the Soviet command economy. While the West, particularly the United States, funded its war effort through complex financial instruments like war bonds sold to a populace with disposable income, the Soviet Union relied heavily on direct expropriation of wealth and labor from its already impoverished citizens. Mariya's donation, while voluntary, was part of a system where the state demanded total sacrifice from everyone. Her unique contribution was to turn this economic sacrifice into a tool for personal agency, leveraging her money to buy not just a tank, but a place in the war she was so desperate to join. The aftermath, a name carved in granite. Mariya Oktyabrskaya was buried with full military honors in the Heroes' Remembrance Garden on the bank of the Dnieper River in the city of Smolensk. Her grave is marked by a simple but dignified monument, a testament to her sacrifice in the city she helped to liberate. Her name was not forgotten. After the war, she was immortalized in the Soviet Union. Streets were named after her in Smolensk, Tomsk, and other cities. Schools were dedicated in her honor, where generations of Soviet children learned the story of the woman who bought a tank to avenge her husband. Her T-34, the fighting girlfriend, became an icon. While the specific hull she commanded was likely destroyed in the war, a T-34 tank was placed on a pedestal in Smolensk, bearing the famous inscription, a permanent memorial to her and her crew. However, the analysis of her memory also reflects the political tides of the time. During the Soviet era, her story was framed primarily as one of communist fervor and devotion to Stalin and the state. Her personal motivations, the deep, abiding love for her husband, were often downplayed in favor of a narrative of pure ideological commitment. With the fall of the Soviet Union, there has been a re-examination of her story. Modern Russian and Western historians now focus more on the powerful human elements, the story of a grieving widow, a woman defying gender norms, and an individual finding agency in the midst of a totalitarian war. This shift in focus does not diminish her heroism, rather, it makes it more relatable and profound. She is no longer just a static symbol of the state, but a dynamic, flesh-and-blood woman who channeled unimaginable personal pain into extraordinary courage. Comparative analysis, other women of steel. While Mariya Oktyabrskaya's role as a tank driver and commander was exceptionally rare, she was not the only woman to serve in Soviet armored forces. Alexandra Samasenko, for example, was a decorated tank commander who served as a deputy commander of a tank battalion and was the only female tanker in the 1st Guards Tank Army. She was tragically killed in 1945. Irina Levchenko was another, starting as a medic but eventually graduating from tank school and commanding a platoon of T-60 light tanks. Comparing their stories provides a richer understanding of the challenges these women faced. Most, like Levchenko, started in more traditional female roles before proving their aptitude and fighting their way into the armored corps. Mariya's path was unique in that she bypassed the entire system through her direct appeal and financial contribution. Furthermore, a comparison with the roles of women in other armies highlights the singularity of the Soviet experience. In the American and British armies, women served with distinction in auxiliary corps, WACs, WAAF, ATA, often in highly skilled and dangerous roles like ferrying aircraft or serving as anti-aircraft gun predictors, but they were explicitly barred from direct ground combat roles. The idea of a woman commanding a Sherman or Churchill tank was simply unthinkable within the military and social structures of the Western Allies. This makes Mariya's story not just one of personal bravery, but a reflection of a societal and military system that, under the extreme duress of war, was forced to jettison traditional gender roles far more radically than its allies or enemies. She stands as a powerful example of how the crucible of the Eastern Front melted down and reforged not just borders and armies, but the very definition of a soldier. The archivist's final assessment. Closing the file on Mariya Vasilyevna Oktyabrskaya, the overwhelming conclusion is that her significance transcends the impressive statistics of her combat record. She represents the terrifying and potent alchemy of modern, industrialized warfare when mixed with the most fundamental human emotions. Her story is a microcosm of the Eastern Front itself, a struggle characterized by immense technological scale, brutal attrition, and deeply personal motivations of hatred, survival, and love. She was not a product of the Soviet system in the way a lifelong party member might be. She was a product of its desperation, a woman who found a loophole in the bureaucracy of war, paid for in cash and sealed with a promise of blood. Her tale serves as a vital counter-narrative to the depersonalized history of tank battles and army groups. It reminds us that inside every one of the 80,000 T-34s produced, there was a crew of human beings, each with their own story, their own grief, and their own reasons for fighting. Mariya's reason was simply clearer and more powerful than most. She did not fight for communism, nor for the glory of the state, though her actions certainly served both. She fought for Ilya Fedorovich Oktyabrskaya. In doing so, she became one of the Second World War's most unlikely, and therefore most compelling, heroes. Her legacy is not just in the monuments of stone and steel, but in the enduring proof that the will of a single, determined individual can become a weapon as powerful and as decisive as the tank they command. The engine of the fighting girlfriend has long fallen silent, but the echo of her courage endures.